guys already know what it is, the lick, the mysterious 7-note melody that seemingly appears everywhere. I've seen someone even poignantly describe this as humanity's leitmotif. Let's take a look at some notable examples in video games and talk about some interesting insights the lick can provide as it relates to music theory as a whole. Honestly though, I think the lick is actually overhyped, and definitely doesn't appear as often as you'd be led to believe. Alright, so for those of you who are confused, let's briefly talk about what the eponymous lick even is. It's really just this short melodic figure that became a meme in the jazz community simply because it seemingly appears so often, typically in solos. The textbook archetypal lick looks like this, these exact notes and note values, in any key of course. The first note is usually our tonic, and we walk up this minor scale kind of flavor until the 4, fall down to the 2, the flat 7, and then resolve up to the 1. Our textbook rhythm is 4 eighth notes, 1 quarter note, and then 2 more eighth notes. Textbook lick starts on the downbeat and perfectly fits within one measure of 4/4. It's also typically swung as it appears most often in jazz settings, but it doesn't really matter. One thing I find quite interesting is the variety of ways I've heard the lick harmonized. Some common ways are the Aeolian-ish 1 flat 7 1, the kind of Mario-ish flat 6 flat 7 1, or just the classic minor 2 5 1. But of course these are just the most common examples. We'll take a look at some tunes that have some cool reharms or feature the lick in a setting that doesn't even outline our 1 chord at all. But before that, just so we can see an example of our perfect archetypal lick in the wild, let's take a listen to Neon City from the underrated Wario Land Shake It. There's pretty much nothing to say about this. We're in the key of C minor, and our lick starts on C as expected, hits the exact rhythms and pitches, and even has a pretty standard harmonization, our aforementioned 1 flat 7 1. But what about other licks that feature all of our correct notes but do interesting things with the rhythm or harmony? The iconic Gourmet Race from Kirby Superstar features this. Our lick is kind of spread out. We feature more quarter notes and start the lick as a pickup, and end the lick as the downbeat resolution on the start of the next bar. The harmony's nothing super interesting, just a 4/5-1 in minor. Still, I think it's interesting how the lick is nested within the melody versus the more exposed example from Wario Land. The pickup kind of extends the earlier idea in the measure, and the end of the lick has this cute little thing it does. But it's still kind of easy to hear because it's at the end of the phrase, making it almost feel like a punchline to those who know. There's actually another Nintendo example of this exact same rhythmic variation of the lick, but a bit more nested in the phrase. Let's take a listen to Smeared Canvas from Splatoon 3. Literally the exact same thing, but now it's kind of hidden in between bars 1 and 3 of the phrase. This one feels a lot more obscured. It feels like a melodic device for movement versus a resolution like in our Kirby and Wario Land tunes. Also, the lick doesn't start on our 1B, but actually starts on our 5th scale degree F sharp, and does this B Dorian kind of thing, which feels super bright and kind of pulls us out of our expected tonality. It's not super jarring melodically or harmonically, but in terms of lick recognizability, definitely obfuscates. But something I find really interesting about the lick is that it's actually rather melodically malleable. You can have the same contour, but change the intervals a bit, and it'll still generally be recognized as the lick. Take a listen to this section of the trombone solo in Monster Hunter Swing's Zinogre theme. Textbook rhythms more or less expected harmony and textbook melody starting on Do, but our last note goes down to our 5th rather than stepping back up to the 1. Still though, since the majority adheres so carefully to the lick, you'd be hard-pressed to find a lick purist who disagrees with this classification. We distort this variation of the lick further in the Borderlands 2 main menu theme. It's pretty much the exact same thing as what we have in Monster Hunter, but these 3 notes are pushed up a diatonic step, resulting in this small jump from the first note to the second. Is this still the lick? Probably a bit more divisive. What about in Twilight Princess's Fair on Woods theme? A further distortion of our variation, we now push the starting note up a step as well, now starting on our 2nd scale degree in the key of C sharp, which is D sharp. But we also push the final 2 notes up a step. We've changed most of the notes, but in my opinion, this tune still just licks you. Okay, no, never mind. This tune still holds up recognizably as the lick, in perhaps a Theseus's ship sort of way. You may have noticed that I have pretty much this exact version of the lick in my title screen music, except with the last note changed to go down. Believe it or not, this little snippet from Fair on Woods actually really stuck with me well before the lick was even a documented thing, and definitely inspired this random little title screen jingle I wrote a while ago. But speaking of video games, and specifically video game composition, this video is sponsored by the Indie Game Music Contest. The Indie Game Music Contest is a unique competition that challenges composers to create adaptive musical scores for indie games. It emphasizes musical storytelling and offers a platform for both beginners and more seasoned composers to showcase their talents. Participants will write music that reacts dynamically to in-game events, simulating real game scoring. Don't worry though, you don't have to know how to implement these tracks, you can just write an overlay or leave a comment about the usage in your submission video. This competition is accessible and beginner-friendly. The judges will be judging the submissions based mostly on your musical ideas, creativity, and storytelling, versus strictly technical prowess. Participants will have the option to score one of 2 unreleased indie games. There's Tethergeist, the run-and-jump adventure game you're currently seeing on screen, and Tiny Garden, a casual indie strategy game. Entrants will also have the opportunity to get personal, individual feedback from a panel of experienced judges in the game music industry, as well as see transparent evaluation criteria for their music. Whether you're a beginner trying to get some valuable game composition experience, or a veteran composer looking for a fun competition, the IGMC is a great opportunity to write and get feedback on your work. You can read more about it on their website, there's some cool prizes, and the deadline for submission is May 1st of this year. Register now and save 10% on the registration fee by using the code Hira. Sign-up link is in the description. But anyways, I unironically think about the lick a lot, and in my opinion, is kind of a microcosm of music theory pedagogy as a whole. But first, here's a quick tangent. A few days ago, I was watching a TikTok that used that one Omae wa mo shinderu audio, and I was thinking about the chord voicings in the guitar. Let's take a listen. If you're analyzing these voicings strictly at face value, here are the chord symbols. I'm especially interested in that last chord. Looking at just this vertical slice, it'd be really easy to call this chord an E minor chord over G. Perhaps you could say it's feeling so fly like a G6, but as it's missing our 5th D, E minor is technically the most correct way to analyze it given no other context. But given our context and minimal chord voicings, it immediately becomes clear this functions as our 5 of 4, a dominant functioning chord that wants to pull back to our 4, which in this case is C major. It's set up by our related 2, D minor 7, and resolves as expected to our 4, C major. The G is our root, the B is our 3rd, and the E is our tension 13, implying a vaguely dominant function, despite not featuring our 5th or dominant 7 anywhere in the chord. The notes in the organ, of course, flesh out the chord a bit more, but I firmly believe the functions remain with just the guitar. It works so well despite the minimalism because the greater context, our chord progression is very common. This is the so-called just the 2 of us chord progression, which you've heard in things like Stronger Than You, or Distant Reality by Blue featuring Valley.exe and Jake Howsam Low. Okay, but anyways, bringing this back around, I think the lick is the perfect, most accessible example of a named trend in music theory that can be easily recognized. It's so simple and short, the intervals are mostly stepwise and easy to hear. You could show a dozen examples of the lick to the average layperson and they'd probably be able to recognize at least the most overt examples in the wild. And even though the lick is kind of this huge joke at this point, I think it still genuinely has merit as an ear training teaching tool. I'm a huge proponent of teaching ear training in broad strokes. I'll never tell my students to learn to recognize something like a chord progression through dissection. Rather, I think it's much more fun and effective to create associations, hear the broad color, feel specific emotions related to the progression. Every time I recognize the Just the Two of Us chord progression in a new song, it's never because I was actively analyzing the chord qualities. I usually think to myself, oh, this kind of sounds like Moonlight Fantasy by TVXQ. And the cool thing about this is, after the period of initial similarity, you can compare and contrast, hear if the chord progression conforms or diverges from this expected model you have in your head. Even in the cases it's a bit different, it still probably adheres enough to be considered our chord progression, and therefore informs us of the theory should we choose to more formally analyze it later. But it's also really cool to see how many concepts in music theory exist in a kind of gray area. The chorus of Jamiroquai's Virtual Insanity doesn't completely adhere to our Just the Two of Us chord progression, but most people who are familiar with the progression would probably agree on first listen that it pretty much is, just based on the vibe. This idea applies to pretty much everything in music theory. I've argued that the last chord in Tiny Little Adiantum functions as a G7 with a 13 because I have this Pavlovian reaction to the chord progression and involuntarily project the model of what the more expected, fleshed out chord sounds onto this little skeleton. It's possible you feel the same way, or maybe you don't. Similarly, you might say that Neon City was the only legitimate lick in this video because nothing else really gives you that lick kind of feeling, and that's okay. It's the combination of this subjectivity and ability to recognize concepts through emotion, like having a giggle at the lick, that just makes music theory so uniquely human. Once again, if you're interested in signing up for the Indie Game Music Contest, check out the link in the description and use my code. The judges are all super cool and it's gonna be a lot of fun. But anyways, that's all I have regarding the lick. This was originally going to be an April Fool's video, but I realized I unironically liked the lick, so I locked in. Post your favorite licks in the comments. I'm sure there's a bunch of other hilarious and obscure examples in video games composed by certified lickaholics.